The year is 2011. A grey-haired German engineer, well into his 70s, walks through a crumbling estate north of Prague. The same halls where, as a boy, he once lived like a prince. Then he says something almost no one expected to hear from him. The men who killed his father, he admits, had reason to do it. His father was Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague, chief architect of the final solution, one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany. This is the story of the 4 children he left behind, and the very different roads they walked after the war. By 1942, Reinhard Heydrich stood among the most powerful men in occupied Europe. He commanded the Reich's vast security apparatus, chaired the Wannsee Conference that coordinated the murder of Europe's Jews, and ruled Bohemia and Moravia so brutally that even fellow Nazis feared him. His wife, Lina, and their children lived in a requisitioned chateau at Panenské Břežany, surrounded by servants, gardens, and stolen comfort. There were 4 of them. Klaus, born in 1933, Heider, a year younger, Silke, born in 1939, and Marte, who never met her father at all. She was born in July 1942, roughly 7 weeks after Czechoslovak agents trained in Britain ambushed Heydrich's car and left him fatally wounded. He died on the 4th of June. His killing unleashed one of the war's most savage reprisals, including the annihilation of the entire village of Lidice, its men shot, its women and children deported, the place itself wiped from the map. But the family's own first tragedy came the next year, and it had nothing to do with the war. On the 24th of October 1943, 10-year-old Klaus was cycling in the estate's courtyard when he rode through an open gate straight into the path of a passing truck. He died that same afternoon. 2 years later, the empire his father had helped build was collapsing. The Red Army was closing in, and Lina Heydrich, widow of a hated man, now had to move 3 surviving children across a disintegrating country before the name Heydrich became a death sentence all its own. In April 1945, with the Reich in its final collapse, Lina fled Panenské Břežany with her surviving children. Their destination was the one place she still thought of as home, the Baltic island of Fehmarn, where she had been born and raised. The journey ran across a ruined Germany, through Bavaria toward the northern coast. The youngest, Marte, not yet 3. Astonishingly, they made it. The family reached the island, minus its infamous father, minus its lost eldest son, whole again on a quiet stretch of coast. But safety was not the same thing as peace. The war ended and the reckoning began. In liberated Czechoslovakia, Lina was branded a war criminal. In 1947, Czechoslovak authorities formally requested her extradition to answer for crimes tied to her husband's rule, and the British military administration, which controlled her corner of occupied Germany, rejected the request. So Lina remained free, on a peaceful island with 3 children and a surname that had become a byword for terror across an entire continent. Most people in her position would have disappeared, buried the past, raised their children in silence. Lina Heydrich chose the opposite path. For the next 40 years, she would not stop defending the man behind the name. And that single decision would shape the world her children grew up in. Lina Heydrich spent her post-war life fighting for her husband's memory and for his money. In 1958, after years of litigation, she won a remarkable legal victory. A West German court ruled that Heydrich's death qualified as the result of a wartime combat action, entitling her to a widow's pension. In the eyes of the law, the architect of the Holocaust had been reduced to a casualty of war. On Fehmarn, she turned Heydrich's former summer house into a guest house and restaurant, running it until it burned down in February 1969. In 1965, she remarried to a Finnish theatre director named Mauno Manninen, in part to shed the weight of her surname. but he died just 4 years later. Then, in 1976, she published her memoir. Its title was bitterly ironic: Life with a War Criminal. The book and the interviews she gave historians and journalists told the same story. Her Reinhard had been a devoted family man, an ordinary official doing a difficult job. She insisted she had known nothing of the camps, dismissed accounts of the Holocaust as a fairy tale, and denied that her husband had played any part in the final solution. She was defending the indefensible, and she never once stopped, right up to her death in August 1985, at the age of 74. This was the world her children grew up in, a household where the crimes were denied, and the father mourned as a hero. The real question was whether they would accept that version of the past, or one day break from it completely. One of them eventually would, but not for a very long time. While their mother courted controversy, Heydrich's surviving children mostly did the opposite. They stepped out of the spotlight she kept chasing and built quiet, private lives. Heider, the elder son, became an engineer. He built a long career in the aerospace industry, working for the German aircraft firm Dornier, where he rose into senior management, and he settled near Munich in Bavaria. He married, he worked, and for decades he said nothing to the press about the man whose name he carried. He would later reveal that he came to understand the full extent of who his father had been only gradually, later in life, through documents, history books, and a hard reading of the record. Silke, born in 1939, trained as an opera singer. She gave the occasional interview over the years, but otherwise kept a far lower public profile than her mother, never turning the family name into a public cause. Marte, the daughter who never knew her father, stayed on Fehmarn, the island that had sheltered the family in 1945. Under her married name, she ran a fashion shop in the town of Berg, living the unremarkable life of a small island businesswoman. 3 children of one of history's most notorious criminals, and for decades they largely kept their father's legacy out of public view, neither campaigning for his memory the way their mother did, nor staging any public reckoning with it. For most of their lives, the family said little, and then, decades after the guns fell quiet, the son who had said the least of all went back. In 2011, Reinhard Heydrich returned to Panenské Břežany, the estate near Prague where he had lived as a boy, where his brother Klaus had died at that open gate, and which his father had once ruled like a conqueror. He was 76, and the man who came back was not there to defend anyone. In an interview with the Czech magazine Reflex, Heider spoke with a candor his mother had never shown. He had visited concentration camps in Germany and Poland. He said he had learned to separate the private father he dimly remembered from the public figure who had helped orchestrate mass murder. And when the conversation turned to the 1942 assassination that had killed his father, Heider did not condemn it. He accepted it, saying he agreed with the assessment that his father had been so dangerous an opponent that eliminating him had to be done. He also recalled being told, long afterward, that Heydrich himself had not wanted Germany to take revenge for his death, a wish the regime brutally ignored when it destroyed Lidice. The visit had already stirred fresh controversy earlier that year. Local officials said Heider had discussed helping to restore the decaying chateau, even mentioning possible European funding, an account he later insisted was exaggerated. Either way, the idea provoked fierce opposition in the Czech Republic at the thought of Heydrich's son restoring Heydrich's palace, and he stepped away from any involvement. But the deeper meaning was impossible to miss. The widow had died in 1985, still insisting her husband was misunderstood. Her son, a generation later, had stood on the very ground of his father's crimes and refused to defend them. Reinhard Heydrich helped build a regime that promised permanence and set out to erase entire peoples from the earth. It collapsed after 12 years. He never faced justice. His victims never saw him answer for what he had done. But history did something quieter instead. His eldest son was killed by an open gate and a passing truck. His widow spent 4 decades defending a lie and died still clutching it. And his surviving children carried the most feared name in Europe into engineering offices, island shops, and quiet, private lives. Until one of them finally went home, looked at the truth, and let the name mean something his father never intended. Not power. Reckoning. But the Heydrichs were far from the only family left to live in the long shadow of the Third Reich. Next, we turn to another name, and the children who inherited a legacy they never chose.